Hey everyone, welcome to our small footprint. Today has been another wet, dreary day, but we haven't had a huge amount of rain. So other than this morning when we got, 10 mils all at once, we haven't had a great deal of any actual rain since then. So I've spent the day out in the kitchen because it hasn't been too wet. It's been okay. So I got a whole bunch done today and I recorded it all to share. I got some lasagna made with pumpkin bechamel sauce and some pasta done and chicken stock, a bunch of things. So I've put them all together to share with you. And the rest of the day we spent transferring water from different places. So we have a IBC out the back that collects water off the roof out the back where the piping doesn't reach the main tank. So then we have a battery operated pump that we use to pump the water from that IBC into the main tank and things like that. So we spent the day doing that. And all the standard stuff that comes with rainy days, topping up the solar with the generator and, all the normal stuff. So come along and see what I made, and I will just buff over a few of the things that I made. If you want them in more detail, I do have the footage of the whole thing, so I can create a video that shows you how the whole thing is made. If that's what you want, let me know and I can do that. Otherwise, I will see you again in another couple of days. See you later. Have a great day. Throughout the weeks since the pumpkin vines have matured, I've been harvesting the pumpkins. We grab some out before there's rain so they don't split, and as they ripen we pull them off and just let the vine keep on doing what it's doing and grab them. But it means that we've still got quite a few to use. So I decided that today I would use a few of them. So I grabbed a couple of the largest ones and I cut them up and peeled them all in rings because I find that the easiest way to do it. I just slice them, use a knife to get the skin off. The little bit of excess pumpkin that I lose isn't really an issue because it gets fed to the animals anyway, so I'm not that concerned. I make sure that when I am peeling them, I save the seeds. So whether I'm saving the seeds for planting purposes or whether I'm saving them to roast up for the kids to eat, I'm actually going to make some granola sometime this week, so I might roast them up and use them in the granola for the kids. They'll enjoy that and it'll be some added nutrients into their granola. I put some yogurt on today, so that makes sense that I'll make some granola for them, so that will work well. And then I dice them into fairly evenly sized cubes. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just want them fairly evenly sized so they cook at the same sort of a speed, and put them all in the baking trays. So I've used some lard in these baking trays. The lard is from when I last roasted pumpkin, so it's got a bit of a orange tinge to it because it's already slightly pumpkin flavored. And I just put a big spoonful in the bottom of each tray and filled it with the cubes. I have 2 of these cast iron trays. I really like these cast iron trays. I've got a link in the comments, I think, for them. And I'd really like to get a couple more and some slightly different size ones. These ones don't fit in the smoker, unfortunately. They're a little bit too big. But I just spread all the cubes out between the 2 baking trays and stuck them in the oven while I went on and got on with doing everything else. So once they were in the oven, the next thing to get on was some stock. So I use my pressure canner to make my stock so that it only takes about the 90 minutes. I had some celery that was in the freezer that I cut up. I put a couple of onions in there, just clean skins on them if these were store-bought ones, so I left the skins on them. If I pull them out from the garden, they're normally a bit dirty. A handful of garlic cloves, again, leave the papers on them if they're clean. If not, then I peel them. A whole bunch of carrots out of the fridge. These were a bit soft and wobbly and wrinkly, which works well to use them in stock because the kids don't want to eat them when they look like that. And then a 1.5 kilo bag of the bones from the thighs that I've been processing. So I've been putting them in 1.5 kilo lots and sticking them in the freezer as I go through the different bags of chicken. So I grabbed one of them out to go in with this lot of stock. Now, if I had have roasted these bones, the stock would be a little bit darker, might be a bit stronger tasting, but I wasn't willing to go that far today. I stuck it all in the pot. This is my Presto pressure canner, which can be used as a cooker as well. I added a little bit of apple cider vinegar to help with pulling those nutrients out of the bones, some coarse sea salt, and then filled it up to I think about the halfway mark of the pot with water. Then stuck the lid on it and got it over the heat. While that was also going, so I've got the pumpkin in the oven and the stock on the stove now, and while they're both going, I decided to make some bolognese meat. Now, I cut up some carrots and I cut up some onions and some celery, some mushrooms, some garlic, all the normal base ingredients for bolognese, and I like to dice it up really fine. So I stick it all in my Thermomix, and then in the Thermomix I run it at, I don't know, 6 seconds at speed, might be 10 seconds at speed 6 probably, and get it all sort of diced. It doesn't have to be particularly even or particularly small because it's going to cook off anyway, but I like to dice it all up like that. Then I throw it in the pan. I grabbed a bag of the zucchini that I had frozen, shredded and frozen, and stuck that in the pan with all the veggies as well. And then I was going to add mince that I had frozen, but I remember that I had a couple of these bolognese that I had frozen, and they had lentils and stuff in them, and I hadn't simmered them quite long enough, so the lentils still had quite a bit of crunch to them, and the kids didn't like it. So I thought that I would use these couple of batches of bolognese as the base for this dish. So I just broke them up into chunks, stuck them in the pan, and then stuck a lid on it so that they would sort of steam and defrost, and turn it down a bit and let it go. Kept on stirring it as they were defrosting and made sure it was all mixed in well as it went. The veggies were cooked off and all that sort of thing. We wanted it kind of thick because what I was going to do with this one was turn it into a lasagna. So I wanted the mince to be fairly thick and not too wet. So I took the lid off it after a while so that it would cook down a little bit as well and some of the moisture would be absorbed, and then let it go. While that was simmering, we got the pumpkin out of the oven. So I wanted it soft but not with too much of a skin on it. So I pulled it out when it was nice and soft, and then as you can see, it just sort of, it's soft enough to squish, but it's not, there's no charring on it or anything like that. I think this was sort of a good consistency for it to come out of the oven. I had to sort the seeds out while I was waiting, so I just sorted out as many of the seeds out of all the pulp as I could. The chickens love the pulp, and if there's any extra seeds, the chickens will really enjoy them as well, so I wasn't overly concerned, but I was getting as many easily obtainable seeds out of the pulp as I could. Once the pumpkin had cooled a little bit, I stuck it in the KitchenAid bowl and used the paddle on the KitchenAid just to mush it up a little bit. I normally just use a fork or a masher or whatever, but I had the KitchenAid bowl handy, so I decided to do it that way. I don't like to use my Thermomix because I don't like it to be really liquidy. I like it to be thick and chunky, not really pureed, which I find the Thermomix, it just goes a little too thin for me, so I use the KitchenAid just to mush it up for me and put that aside. So what I'm going to do with the mince is I'm going to make a lasagna using pumpkin as the base to my bechamel sauce. So I did a normal, it's a basic bechamel, but I did some ghee in the pan and then added flour to it and cooked the flour off like normal. Added some of the smoked garlic paste to that as well. And then I used coconut cream and water in the coconut cream can afterwards, and kept on whisking like you normally do with any sort of a white sauce or a bechamel sauce. I kept on whisking to blend that coconut cream and the flour together. It thickens up, and you keep it whisking, stops it from getting any lumps and things like that. And then I added a couple of cups of the pumpkin puree and just whisked it. Now, I didn't like the texture of it just with a whisk. It was a little stringy, a little lumpy, and I didn't think that the kids would appreciate that. So I whisked it for quite a while to see if it would all sort of come together, but it didn't really come together quite how I wanted it to be. So I decided to pull the immersion blender out and use that as well, just to get it nice and smooth so that it didn't have any bright orange chunks or anything like that, because you know, the better it looks, the more inclined the kids are going to be to eat it. So I decided that it was worth that little bit of extra effort. For the lasagna, I made some pasta sheets. So I already had some sourdough pasta that I made the other day and had been in the fridge. I hadn't had a chance to roll it all out. So I grabbed it out of the fridge and let it warm up a little bit, and I used the KitchenAid pasta roller attachment to create the sheets. So The pasta had been sitting in the fridge for a couple of days, which is normally what I'd do, but the weather has been really bad, and rolling pasta in moist weather isn't ideal, but it's supposed to rain for the next few days, so I didn't have a whole lot of choice. But it meant that it took a fair bit of work of rolling and folding and rolling and folding to get it to nice and smooth texture, get all the air out of it and things like that. So I just worked it until it worked. So we start on a thickness 8, which is the biggest thickness, the most thick start, and fold it and re-roll it and fold it and re-roll it until you take it down to the 1, and then cut it into the right lengths. So my pans end up being 32 centimeters long, so I was cutting the sheets into that, and 2 of them fit across it, so that worked out quite well. After I got the pasta rolled out into the appropriate sizes, I layered them up. So I used a little bit of mince on the bottom so that the pasta had something to sit on. Two pieces of pasta, as I said, fit nicely into the pans just on top of that mince, and then another layer of mince and a layer of the pumpkin bechamel, and then another layer of pasta, mince and bechamel, and then we just left it at that. I only did the 2 layers. A third layer might have fit in the pan, but it probably would have made a mess in my oven, so I thought I was just going to stick with 2, and then that way I managed to get 2 full trays at 2 layers as well, so that worked out quite well. Then we can cut each of those into the appropriate amount of pieces, and the kids can have it for lunch tomorrow as well as dinner tonight, or they can have it for dinner tomorrow night if I make a side with it, or I don't know. But there's more than one meal worth there when it's in the 2 trays. They'd be more inclined to eat it all at once if it was just 1 tray worth. Once it was all laid up, I stuck it in the oven again. I didn't time how long I cooked it. I just cooked it until the top had gone sort of brown and crackly and the pasta would be cooked through. It wouldn't have taken long because it was fresh pasta, only just rolled, and the bolognese had just been cooked and was warm. So I don't know, I would say 25-30 minutes is probably all it really needs. I didn't look, I have no idea how long I cooked it for. I cooked it until it looked cooked. And put that aside to cool. After that, I had to strain the stock. So all the solids from our chicken stock goes to the dogs. Because it's been pressure cooked for 90 minutes, it's all the bones. You can just about like puree them in your hands. They're almost like a powdery consistency. So what we do is we strain most of the liquid out, and then we puree all the solids to add to the dog's food. I decided to can some of this stock because we've only got a few jars on the shelf, so I filled 8 quart jars with the strained stock because that's how many fits in my canner. Did the normal, cleaned the rims with some white vinegar. I don't skim the fat off my stock, so you got to make sure the rims are nice and clean because there's fat in the stock. And then put the lids on there and rings to finger tight. My rings are grubby. I get comments about that. In the kind of weather that we have, they're exposed to all sorts of things, and they discolor. And so long as they're not mishappen in any shape, they work for me. So all good. And then into the canner. Now the water in the canner is hot because the stock is hot. So you always put your jars into water that is the same temperature as what's inside the jars, and then put the lid on and let it come up to temperature. While I was waiting for that, I started another task. I had some chicken that I had defrosted for a meal and then sort of forgotten that I had it there, so it needed to be used. So I made up a seasoned flour mix, which is just basically plain flour, some garlic powder, salt, pepper, bit of thyme, paprika, that sort of thing. Flavors that I enjoy. You can use anything you want in it, really. And then cracked some eggs into a second bowl to make what I refer to as faux KFC chicken. This is what it resembles the flavor of KFC chicken to me, to tenders and stuff. So I dipped the chicken into the flour and then into the egg and then into the flour. Again, making sure it's all sort of puckered in on it, and that turns into like a batter on the chicken or a crumb. It's a little bit in between both of them. Use different hand for each task makes it easier. One hand for doing dry flour, one hand for wet, like picking up the wet chicken and putting it in the eggs and stuff. It's always a good idea, makes the task go quicker. And I did that with all the, I think it was 1.5 kilo bag of fillets that I had cut up. And these chicken breasts were actually from last month's shopping. We hadn't used them and they were in the freezer. So this was from April's shop, April, what are we in? We're May. Whichever shopping it was, the shopping before last, and it was still in the freezer. So I coated all of that chicken ready to go. Then the pressure canner had hit temperature. So this is what it does when it's at temperature. It's venting hot air. You need to let it vent for 10 minutes. So I let it do that. And after it had vented for 10 minutes, I placed the weight on top so that it could come up to pressure. Once it comes up to pressure, the little weight dances on the top. It rattles and it dances and jiggles on the top of the canner. And then once it's jiggling, I start the timer for 25 minutes for chicken stock. I cooked the KFC chicken in lard. We find that that's the best thing to use to get it nice and crispy in the cast iron in the lard. So we just heat the lard up nice and hot and place the chicken in it. Let it cook all on one side. You can see it sort of shrinks up at the sides and you can tell it's cooked, and then flip it once and let it cook until it's cooked all the way through. And we just do that with the whole amount of chicken, one after the other. Don't overcrowd it in the pan. It'll cook better. Add a bit more lard if the pan gets a little bit dry, and it works really well. Everyone really enjoys it. After all that, it was time to serve the kids dinner. So I sliced up the lasagna, and this is what it looks like. The layers stuck really well actually with the pumpkin bechamel, the sourdough pasta, everything. It looks really nice. You can see all the different layers of meat and pasta and the sauce. Everyone really enjoyed it. The kids had seconds and thirds. Darryl did the same. I'm not a fan of pumpkin, so I didn't really like it, but I knew that was going to be the case. I knew I was cooking it for them, not for me, so that's okay. After the canner had gone for the 25 minutes, we turn the heat off, and you have to wait for it to come down off pressure, and then you can take the lid off it. And then I put all the jars on the bench, and you can see that they're still bubbling a little bit inside there, which is normal. That's what you want. You want them to have that pressure inside the jars as well, and they will sit here until the morning when I will test all the lids and then put them either in the fridge or on the shelf. And that was my day. Lots of varied bits and pieces of cooking, using up that pumpkin and making a few different meals that are going to last us over the next few days. I hope you enjoyed watching, and thank you for watching, and I will talk to you again soon.